This happened to me over a decade ago. It was a late December in a small Texas town. We just received 5 inches of snow earlier in the day. I can't remember what time it was, but I do remember that it was dark out. It's important to note that my room was made up of 2 separate rooms, a mudroom which led out to the front of my house, and then my actual bedroom. The door was an older style wooden door with a lot of old hardware, and it had a window on the top half of it. It had a window shade, but that wouldn't stop anyone from looking in if they really wanted to. My room was the frontmost, with my parents' room being at the back of the house. I was in my mudroom playing with my Hot Wheels when I felt something weird, like someone was watching me. I was facing the door at this point, and I looked right up at the window. I was trying to focus on the little openings left by the window shade. I stared, looking for any reason to feel unsafe and run. After a while, I was sure that there was nothing, so I went back to playing. A few minutes later, I got that same feeling again. This time I didn't look at the door, but I instead moved to it with my back facing it. I was just hoping that this was all in my head. Just then, the most terrifying thing happened. There was a noise at the door, like the doorknob had been touched. I was still turned around, back facing the door. I was completely frozen at the metal-on-metal sound of the doorknob. It was moving. I didn't know how or why, but it was moving. Slowly turning, testing the lock, I wanted to move, but I was frozen. It was like someone glued every joint in my body. My chest felt like a car was parked on it. My parents had been in their shower all the way at the back of the house, leaving me at the front, all alone. And lucky for me, the only room lit up in the whole house at that point was mine. Suddenly, the knob wasn't being gently moved anymore. Someone was turning it with force. The door was one that had to be locked with a skeleton key, so the knob could turn open and freely. Luckily, there were 2 deadbolts. Whoever was on the other side just figured out that the knob was free to open. As soon as I heard the knob turn all the way, I sprung up to the wall about 5 feet from the door, my back to the wall. The door felt silent. I found myself glued to the wall, unable to move, and then the knob started turning slowly. I remember watching, waiting for it to turn all the way, and when it did, whoever was on the other side started trying to budge the door and pry at it as if it was going to be easy. But then they started pounding into the door with their foot. They got only 2 kicks in when I unfroze and finally screamed for my life. I sprinted to the back of the house to get my parents, and they asked what was wrong. I told them that someone was trying to break in. They ran and checked, not bothering to look outside despite me pleading them to. They just said my imagination was running wild and that it was an animal, or just the old age of the house. They took one final look in my mudroom, not bothering to investigate any further, and I was told to go to bed. It took me hours. I don't even remember falling asleep. All I remember is staring at my door from my bed, never taking my eyes off the knob. Suddenly, I was awoken by my parents, who were obviously distressed and seemed to be scared. My mom grabbed me by both shoulders and got right in front of me. She asked very sternly why I thought someone tried to break in. When I told them this time, they finally seemed to listen. I was worried how serious they were when they asked me about everything. When I was done, they said that they had to show me something. They took me out the front door and to the front yard, and I pointed to my door near the driveway. From there, you could clearly see boot prints in the snow, walking along the street through our yard and straight to my window, then my mudroom door, where I'd been playing the night prior. The police showed up and took a report, but nothing ever came of it. I was never able to sleep well in that house after that. I just can't forget what it was like as a child to go through this, and to not have my parents believe me. I'm just glad I wasn't home alone, and I'm still very thankful for those deadbolts. This encounter happened when I was about 10 years old. My sister and I were home alone since it was during the summer. Both our mom and our grandmother were too busy, so they couldn't stay home with us. We were used to being home alone during the summer, so it wasn't a big deal. The only thing we couldn't do was go outside or open the door if someone knocked. During this particular day, I had gotten up and started playing The Sims 2 in our kitchen. My sister was watching TV in our den, and a few hours into the gaming, I heard a doorbell ring. At first, I thought it was my game, but I had the sound turned off, so that wouldn't make any sense. I asked my sister if she heard the doorbell, and she replied that she didn't. She said it was probably just the show she was watching, so I brushed it off and went back to playing my game. About 10 minutes later, I see in the reflection of my computer screen that there's a man in a suit standing behind me. He had his hands cupped around his eyes, looking through the glass of our back doors. I turned around to be face to face with this strange man I had never seen before. I had no idea how long he had been watching me, but he waved at me like he knew me from somewhere. I called my sister over, and she apparently hadn't noticed him yet. She grabs the house phone and quickly calls our grandmother. Now, we had seen salespeople before, but none of them looked like this guy. He was wearing a full-on black suit that just didn't fit him. If not strange enough that this guy was wearing a full-on suit in 99-degree heat, he also was carrying a briefcase. All the salespeople I had ever seen only ever had a clipboard or maybe a couple flyers, but this man had the whole deal going, briefcase and everything. The next flag that came with this guy was that he decided to walk around our house and come to the back door, which during his little trip he definitely would have seen that there wasn't a car in the driveway, indicating that no one was home. I was getting up to go hide from this guy, and that's when he grabbed the doorknob and started to jiggle it forcefully. Thankfully, the door was locked. He looked at me smiling, and then gestured for me to come back and unlock the door for him. All the noise he had been making had now set off our 75-pound lab mix, making her go batshit crazy. I felt some sort of comfort knowing that if the guy did manage to get in, she wasn't going to let him get anywhere near us. My sister tells me that our grandmother is on her way, and she wanted us to hide in the back of the house, in her room until she could get home. My sister hands me the phone and then runs into the kitchen to grab the biggest knife we have. I can hear her yelling at the guy that we called the cops. She comes back into the room with me and shuts the door. She tells me that after she lied to the guy about calling the cops, he just started laughing, like she had told him the funniest joke that he had ever heard. A little while later, we hear our door open and our grandmother calling us. We come out to meet her, and she tells us that she didn't see the man anywhere. She had walked around the whole house before unlocking the door. She also thought it was weird that if he was really a salesperson, then he would have left a note of some sort. She ended up taking the rest of the day off to look after us and make sure the guy didn't come back. It's been 11 years since this encounter, and I still don't know what he had in that briefcase of his. I was 14 at the time of this incident. My younger brother and I were at home alone, watching TV during summer break. For background, we lived about 20 minutes outside of a very rural town. All of our home windows were open on this day, and suddenly we heard the sound of a man's voice outside. Upon inspection, we saw a man looking around our property. We'd been getting a lot of unknown relatives showing up at our house since we moved out of state, so I called my mom to ask if she was expecting anyone. I was on the phone with her when I saw the man looking in our window. My mom advised me to hide my little brother and lock the doors and windows. Well, I barely had stuffed my brother in my bedroom closet and locked my window when I heard a loud noise. I told my mom that I thought he might be in the house. I briefly considered taking out my .22 rifle with me to investigate. I worried that if I brought a rifle out that I might scare the intruder, who would in turn hurt me. It was better to leave it out of sight, but accessible. So, I walked out of my room and began down the hallway when I ran into the intruder face to face, dropping my cell phone and my call with my mom out of fear. She heard me scream and quickly called the cops. Unfortunately, we live on an Indian reservation and the city police had no jurisdiction there. She had to find the tribal number and wait on hold for their police to respond to the situation. I spoke with the man in the meantime, not knowing that anyone was coming to help. He made up some story about breaking in to use the phone because his dad was having a heart attack. He gave his dad's address, which was far from where we were located. He asked my name, tried to introduce himself, and asked how old I was. He was lingering in my hallway and slowly stepping closer to me. I told him he could use my cell to call for help, but he needed to go outside first. Once outside, I told him that he needed to leave so I could call my mom back. Upon hearing this, he took off running through our field the second he found out that my mom knew of him. I found out later from the police that the intruder had weapons on him. He was caught and sent to jail for several years, and once he was out, he stabbed at least 2 people during home invasions and attacked another person with a boulder walking on a path. I'm 26 now, and the thought of this encounter still creeps me out. I can't imagine what would have happened if I didn't tell him that my mom knew he was there.